Good Morning Britain had rarely opened with this level of tension. Meghan Markle sat between Susanna Reid and Ed Balls, but the atmosphere on the breakfast sofa felt noticeably different from a routine celebrity interview. She had arrived alone, without Harry, and reportedly without their children. An arrangement that had already attracted attention before the cameras even started rolling. The interview began politely, with the familiar warmth of breakfast television, but that changed quickly when Susanna turned to the reason for Meghan's visit and the complications reportedly surrounding the trip. What Meghan said caused Susanna's expression to tighten. Then came the follow-up questions. Calm, direct, and increasingly difficult to sidestep. "This is the interview Britain woke up to," the narrator declared. "Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and let's see what happened." The Good Morning Britain studio was already buzzing before the interview began. Cameras were positioned, producers reviewed final notes, and Susanna Reid and Ed Balls prepared for what was clearly expected to be a major segment. Meghan arrived on schedule and took her place between the presenters, offering polite greetings before settling into the conversation. "Meghan, welcome to Good Morning Britain," Susanna said. "Thank you. It's lovely to be here. We're delighted to have you, especially given everything that has apparently happened around this particular visit." Susanna continued, "There's quite a lot to unpack." Meghan remained composed. "I'm happy to discuss my time here." Susanna shifted into interviewer mode. "Let's begin with something significant. You're here without Harry and, reportedly, without your children as well. Given the security arrangements surrounding the trip, why did you decide to come at all?" Meghan paused before answering. "I had personal engagements that required my presence." "Personal engagements significant enough to travel without your family during what was originally presented as a family reunion trip?" Susanna asked. "That sounds like quite a substantial change from the original plan." "Circumstances required flexibility. Circumstances such as the reported disagreement over police protection outside royal properties." Susanna replied. "That's rather specific. So why did the children ultimately remain behind?" "Security decisions are made with their well-being as the priority." Susanna didn't move on. "Then why are you here without that same consideration applying to you? If the security arrangements weren't considered adequate for the children, what makes your own safety calculation different?" Meghan answered carefully. "Adult security requirements are different from children's requirements." "They are different," Susanna acknowledged. "But you're still choosing to be here, in circumstances where your family apparently couldn't travel under the same conditions. That seems like something worth explaining more fully." She glanced at her notes. "There are also reports that you're attending Kris Jenner's birthday celebrations while you're here. Is that accurate?" Meghan's expression remained controlled. "I maintain friendships internationally. Kris Jenner specifically, though, is rather notable timing," Susanna pressed. "Why prioritize a celebrity event during a trip that was supposedly centered around family reconciliation, particularly when your children ultimately couldn't join you?" "My schedule involves multiple commitments." "Multiple commitments that apparently outweighed remaining with your family during a trip and to reconnect them with their grandfather." Meghan shifted slightly. "You're mischaracterizing a complex situation." "Then help me understand the complexity," Susanna responded. "Because from the outside, it looks like a social event was prioritized over family reconciliation. Friendships require maintenance regardless of circumstances, even during a week when your children are absent, because security arrangements couldn't be finalized." Susanna asked. "That timing still seems worth addressing directly." Ed Balls remained mostly silent, watching the exchange unfold. Susanna then moved to another point. "Harry arrived separately several days before you. That seems unusual for what was described as a family trip. What actually happened with the original travel arrangements?" Meghan answered without hesitation. "Logistics required separate arrangements." Susanna nodded, but the questioning clearly wasn't finished. Separate arrangements can happen, of course. But when you combine the separate travel, the children remaining behind, the security concerns, and your other commitments, people are naturally going to ask whether this was ever really the family trip it was presented as. For the first time, Meghan's expression appeared noticeably tighter. We've always had to adapt to changing circumstances. And perhaps that's the central issue. Susanna said calmly. People aren't necessarily asking why plans changed. They're asking whether the explanation being given now matches what people were originally told. The studio fell quiet. It was no longer a routine celebrity interview. Susanna had turned the conversation toward the gaps between the public narrative and the decisions surrounding the trip. And suddenly, every answer seemed to create another question. Logistics. Or did the security situation actually change your plans midway through? Susanna Reid's question landed with precision. She glanced at her notes before continuing. Reports suggest the police protection offer covered royal properties rather than the entire visit. Is that why your children remained in America? Meghan kept her expression controlled. Security decisions involve many factors. Susanna immediately followed up. That doesn't actually answer my question. Did inadequate security protection specifically cause your children to remain behind while you traveled? Meghan reached for her water. I won't discuss specific security details publicly. The answer prompted another pointed response. You've discussed security extensively in previous interviews, court proceedings, and documentaries. Why is this particular situation suddenly off limits? Ongoing security matters require discretion. Discretion that seems to become particularly important whenever questions become specific rather than general. Susanna replied. That pattern itself is worth noting. The studio became noticeably quieter. Susanna moved to another issue. Harry reportedly declined and then accepted an invitation from Buckingham Palace. Palace sources have suggested there was confusion surrounding deadlines and communication. What actually happened? Meghan answered carefully. I wasn't directly involved in those specific arrangements. Not involved. Susanna repeated. Yet you're his wife, and presumably you're aware of major decisions involving royal accommodation. Are you suggesting you had no knowledge of that entire situation? Harry manages certain logistics independently. Susanna raised an eyebrow. Independently enough that his own wife wasn't informed about whether he was accepting or declining a Buckingham Palace stay. That seems rather significant to be completely separate from your awareness. Meghan remained composed. Marriages don't require complete information sharing about every logistical decision. Most marriages don't involve decisions of this magnitude. Susanna countered. A palace invitation isn't a minor scheduling detail. It's a substantial decision concerning family accommodation, and most spouses would presumably discuss something like that. Eid Balls remained quiet, watching the exchange. Susanna then changed direction, but the pressure remained. Let's talk about the divorce rumors. They've been persistent for months. Given that you're here without Harry, without your children, under circumstances that seem increasingly complicated, what is your response to those reports? Tabloid speculation without foundation. Speculation that gains more attention because of your current circumstances. Susanna replied, separate travel, your children being absent, and reports of you attending a celebrity celebration, rather than remaining with your family. Does any of that actually support your denial? Every choice I make receives media scrutiny disproportionate to its actual meaning. Or perhaps the scrutiny exists because the choices themselves raise legitimate questions. Susanna said, what would you say to people who view this trip as evidence supporting the divorce speculation rather than contradicting it? I would say they're drawing unfounded conclusions. Unfounded based on what alternative explanation? Susanna asked. Because you still haven't explained why this trip looks so different from the family reunion that was originally described. Meghan paused. Susanna leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you directly. Is your marriage currently stable, given everything surrounding this trip? My marriage remains solid. Susanna didn't hesitate. Solid marriages don't typically involve separate international travel, children remaining behind, and one spouse attending celebrity events instead of staying together during complicated circumstances. Can you address that contradiction directly? You're drawing conclusions from limited information. Then provide the fuller information that would actually resolve those questions. Susanna replied, So far, you've offered generalities rather than specifics. At that point, Edballs gently attempted to redirect the conversation. Perhaps we could discuss the actual purpose behind. These are legitimate questions that people are asking. Susanna interrupted calmly, especially given the public interest surrounding this visit. Meghan looked toward her. I don't owe anyone a detailed accounting of my marriage. Susanna nodded. You don't owe anyone every private detail. But you chose this platform, this interview, and this conversation. When you offer a broad denial without addressing the circumstances that created the questions, it doesn't necessarily resolve them. She allowed a brief pause. Sometimes, it simply leaves people wondering what remains unexplained. Then Susanna shifted to another deeply personal subject. Your father, Thomas Markle. Given all the discussion about family reconciliation, involving Harry's side of the family, has your own father come up during this visit at all? Meghan's expression changed immediately. The earlier composure seemed to harden. My relationship with my father remains private. Private? Susanna asked. Yet you're specifically here for family-related purposes. According to the public explanation surrounding the trip, doesn't that make his continued absence from any reconciliation efforts rather notable? Different family relationships require different approaches. Susanna nodded slowly. Of course. But that distinction raises another question. If reconciliation is important enough to organize an international trip, why does reconciliation appear to apply selectively within the family? Meghan didn't respond immediately. The studio fell silent again. Ed glanced toward Susanna, then toward Meghan, as if anticipating another attempt to soften the conversation. But Susanna continued, I'm not asking you to reveal private conversations. I'm asking whether there is a consistent principle behind these decisions. Because from the outside, the public is seeing a series of conflicting messages: family reunion, separate travel, security concerns, missing children, social commitments, and now questions about your marriage. Meghan's expression remained unreadable. My family circumstances are more complicated than people understand. Susanna answered quietly. Then perhaps that is exactly why people are asking for clarity. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The interview had moved far beyond celebrity promotion. What began as a routine breakfast television appearance had become a tense examination of family, security, marriage, and the explanations surrounding Meghan's visit. And judging by the silence in the studio, Susanna wasn't finished. Different how, specifically? Susanna asked, keeping her tone measured. Your father is elderly. He has reportedly experienced serious health complications, and he has publicly expressed a desire for reconciliation. Yet during this visit, you're reportedly making time for a high-profile reality television personality instead. Surely that comparison deserves to be addressed. Meghan's expression tightened. You're conflating separate issues that have nothing to do with each other. They're connected by the central theme of this entire trip: family reconciliation. Susanna replied, if that really is the priority, then your father's continued absence from any reconciliation effort seems relevant, not unrelated. I don't have to justify every personal decision to a television audience, Meghan said, her composure beginning to crack. Susanna remained calm. You're a public figure who specifically chose this trip, this platform, and this conversation. Asking for clarification isn't unreasonable when your choices intersect with matters of significant public interest. Security arrangements, family relationships, and questions surrounding your marriage. This entire interview has become an interrogation. No, Susanna answered firmly. It has become direct questioning about circumstances that are publicly relevant and that you've chosen to discuss by accepting this appearance. That isn't an interrogation. It's basic accountability journalism." Meghan shook her head. "I came here to discuss meaningful engagement, not have my entire life picked apart." And meaningful engagement includes addressing the actual circumstances surrounding your visit, Susanna replied, rather than discussing only the aspects that present favorably. So far, every difficult subject has received a general response rather than a substantive explanation. "I came here expecting fair treatment." She shifted forward, appearing ready to stand. "This is fair treatment," Susanna said. "Fair treatment means asking direct questions about your own decisions and expecting meaningful answers rather than vague explanations. So far, you've provided almost nothing specific about the genuinely newsworthy elements of this particular visit. Every question has felt hostile from the beginning. Every question has been direct about publicly relevant circumstances surrounding your own choices this week." Susanna replied, "If directness feels hostile, that discomfort comes from the situation being questioned, not from the fact that I'm asking about it." Meghan's patience appeared to be running out. "I won't continue sitting here being attacked." She reached for her purse. "You're not being attacked," Susanna responded. "You're being asked to explain decisions that naturally attract public interest. Why aren't your children here? Why are you reportedly attending celebrity events instead of spending that time with your family? And is your marriage stable given everything surrounding this trip?" She paused. "Those aren't personal attacks. They're the questions this situation naturally raises." Meghan stood and moved toward the exit. "You've been completely unprofessional." Susanna's response remained remarkably controlled. "Unprofessional would be inventing accusations. Everything I've asked relates to reported circumstances surrounding your own trip." Meghan continued toward the studio door. "The way I've been treated today is something history will remember." Susanna looked directly at her. "History may instead remember an interview where a public figure was asked to explain basic decisions surrounding a heavily discussed trip and chose not to answer those questions. Asking difficult questions isn't unfair treatment. It's accountability." Meghan paused briefly at the door before leaving the studio. The door closed behind her. For several seconds nobody spoke. Ed Balls finally broke the silence. "Well, that wasn't quite the segment we planned." Susanna turned toward the camera. "I want to be very clear about what just happened," she said. "Every question I asked was connected to circumstances surrounding this visit. The security concerns, the children remaining behind, the reported celebrity event, the family questions, and the questions surrounding her marriage. These weren't issues invented inside this studio." She took a breath. "They were already matters of public discussion, and the purpose of an interview is to ask questions about them." The studio remained unusually quiet. "What we witnessed instead," Susanna continued, "was someone unwilling to engage with reasonable scrutiny surrounding decisions connected to her own trip. That, in itself, tells us something." Iad nodded. "We've had guests facing serious controversies who have stayed and answered difficult questions. It's never comfortable, but that's part of being interviewed." Susanna agreed. "Exactly. Difficult questions aren't automatically hostile questions." Owen added. "I tried gently redirecting the conversation a few times because I wanted it to become more constructive, but every attempt seemed to lead back to the same problem. Answers without much detail." "That's precisely right," Susanna said. She looked toward the empty chair where Meghan had been sitting moments earlier. An interview doesn't require a guest to reveal every private detail of their life. But when someone comes onto a major public program during a highly scrutinized visit, they should expect questions about the circumstances surrounding that visit." Id leaned back. "And walking away is certainly one way to end an interview." Susanna gave a restrained nod. "But it doesn't necessarily end the questions." The camera slowly widened, capturing the empty sofa, and the presenters sitting in silence. What had begun as a scheduled breakfast television appearance had ended with a walk-off. leaving viewers with more questions than answers, and ensuring that the interview would likely become the biggest talking point of the morning. Sometimes, direct questions, however uncomfortable they may be, are actually the more respectful approach. They treat a guest as an adult capable of discussing their own decisions, rather than someone who needs to be protected from basic accountability. Susanna Reid straightened in her chair and addressed the criticism surrounding the interview. "This isn't about personal animosity toward anyone," she explained. "It's about maintaining the same standard we apply to every guest who sits on this sofa, regardless of their public profile, influence, or previous relationships with the media." The interview footage aired that morning, and the broadcast was presented as a complete segment. Clips quickly circulated online, focusing on the most tense exchanges. One moment repeatedly resurfaced. "If security wasn't considered adequate for the children, what was different about your own safety calculation?" Another clip captured Susanna pressing for a direct response. "That doesn't actually answer my question." Then came the exchange about Meghan's marriage. Solid marriages don't typically involve separate international travel, absent children, and one spouse attending celebrity events, instead of remaining together during complicated circumstances. Susanna's approach remained consistent. That comparison is worth addressing directly. And when Meghan described the interview as an interrogation, Susanna responded, "That's not an interrogation. That's basic accountability journalism." The clip spread rapidly, turning the interview into a broader debate about celebrity interviews, privacy, and the responsibilities that come with public life. Meghan's team later released a statement criticizing the interview. The statement characterized the appearance as an ambush and accused the program of using hostile questioning, while failing to appreciate the complexity of the security circumstances surrounding the trip. Susanna addressed that criticism the following day. "Ambush suggests deception about the format or intent," she said. "Everyone appearing on Good Morning Britain understands that we ask direct questions about relevant public matters." She continued by pointing out that the subjects discussed during the interview had already been publicly reported. The security arrangements, the children remaining behind, the reported celebrity event, and the marriage speculation were already matters of public discussion. "I simply asked her to address them directly." Susanna argued that difficult questions were not unusual on the program. "We've interviewed people facing serious political crises who managed to stay and engage with difficult questions. The expectation isn't that every guest agrees with the interviewer. The expectation is that they engage with the questions." For Susanna, the incident represented the kind of pressure that comes with live breakfast television: maintaining composure, remaining precise, and continuing to ask relevant questions, even when the guest becomes uncomfortable. For Meghan, the timing made the confrontation particularly significant. The questions weren't focused on distant rumors or decades-old controversies. They concerned decisions and circumstances surrounding a trip that was already attracting attention. The audience had heard questions about why the children remained behind, questions about the reported celebrity event, questions about family relationships, and questions concerning the state of Meghan's marriage. Each subject had become part of the public conversation. And when Meghan eventually left the studio, the walk-off became the defining moment of the interview. For millions watching breakfast television that morning, the contrast was striking. Susanna remained seated, composed and persistent, while Meghan's frustration appeared to increase as the questioning continued. Susanna asked why the children had remained behind. Meghan responded with general statements about security. Susanna questioned the timing of the reported celebrity event. Meghan emphasized her various commitments. Susanna asked how the circumstances surrounding the trip aligned with claims that her marriage remained stable. Meghan ultimately chose to leave. That departure became the story itself. Supporters argued that Meghan had every right to refuse questions about private family matters. Critics argued that accepting a high-profile interview meant accepting reasonable scrutiny about the circumstances surrounding the visit. And somewhere between those two positions was the central issue. How much explanation should a public figure provide when private decisions become part of a public narrative? The interview offered no simple answer, but it did demonstrate one thing clearly. Direct questioning can expose the limits of carefully prepared messaging. A publicist can prepare statements. A communications team can anticipate headlines. A guest can decide which subjects they prefer to discuss. But live interviews introduce unpredictability. A follow-up question can challenge a rehearsed response. A clarification can reveal an inconsistency. And when an answer remains vague, the interviewer can simply ask again. That was what Susanna did. She kept returning to the same basic questions. What happened? Why did the plans change? Why were the children absent? How did the security situation affect the decision? And what did all of this mean for the family circumstances surrounding the visit? Whether viewers agreed with Susanna's approach or Meghan's decision to walk away, the confrontation became impossible to ignore. It also highlighted the difference between controlling a narrative and answering questions about it. Some public figures handle difficult questioning with humor. Others respond with detailed explanations. Some challenge the premise of the question itself. And sometimes, a guest simply decides the conversation has gone too far. Meghan chose departure. The audience was left to interpret what that meant. Was it a reasonable boundary against intrusive questioning, or an unwillingness to engage with uncomfortable scrutiny? That became the debate. For Good Morning Britain, the segment was no longer just another celebrity interview. It became a discussion about what happens when carefully managed public narratives collide with live, unscripted accountability. If you enjoy stories where difficult questions reveal what carefully prepared answers cannot, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Because in television, the most revealing moment isn't always the answer. Sometimes, it's what happens when the question is asked again.